Next.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a little past 2 o'clock, so we'd like to start the session. Unfortunately, some guests from other parts of Niigata, like Nagaoka and Niigata University, might be a little late because their bus got stuck on the way. But we are very limited time, so we'd like to start today's session. It's a great honor to have Miss Ahunna Eziakonwa, UNDP Assistant Administrator and Regional Director for Africa, and United Nations Assistant Secretary General with us here at IUJ. And I also would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Nakamura, who is the special advisor to the president of JICA. And among the audience, we have colleagues from IUJ, of course, and Kokusai Joho High School, and from the local community, and guests from Niigata University and Nagaoka University of Technology might be joining us later. Now, today's topic, Unlocking Africa's Potential Africa-Japan Partnership, is a very important and timely agenda, isn't it? It is important because naturally of the importance of the African continent is going to assume in the coming decades. By the end of this 21st century, the population of Africa is expected to grow to 4.3 billion, roughly 40% of the total population of the world. So Africa and Asia are two major continents in terms of population, economy, and maybe politics, and in other fields such as science and technology, sports, and arts. So it is doubtlessly certain that Africa is going to be an important continent. But if you ask any Japanese people about Africa and ask them what do they know about Africa, maybe they think of lions, elephants, giraffes, or in some other cases, they associate Africa with poverty, conflict, corruption, and things like that. I don't deny that such challenges remain and persist, but there are very many bright aspects of Africa. So I hope taking today's opportunity, we're going to discuss both the potentials and challenges as well, and what Japanese people and those African students living and studying in Japan can do to strengthen the friendly and productive relationship between Japan and Africa, a continent of the 21st century. So with this short remark, I'd like to invite Miss Ahunna Eziakonwa to give her a lecture about how to unlock Africa's potential and how to strengthen Africa-Japan partnerships. Let us warmly welcome her to the podium.
Thank you very much. I'm just testing this to see if you can hear me well. Yes, it's a very calm room. So I'm hoping to, by the end of this lecture, have a lot of energy in the room from all of you. It's going to be less of a lecture and more of a conversation. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to really say what a great pleasure it is to be here to join you today in this conversation. I want to thank you, Vice Rector Kato-san, and also the leadership of this great university, the International University of Japan. Thanks also to a senior advisor from JICA, who is been with us since yesterday, Mr. Nakamura. Thanks for coming again today. And of course, all our partners and the students from this university and my TCAD colleagues who put this creative program together for me. This invitation illuminates our scholarly commitment to seeking fresh approaches to rapid global development. And I want to use the opportunity to begin to unveil a little bit some of the key issues around the misperceptions and myths about Africa. And that's going to be my central topic today because of the impact this misconception has on our overall mission to transform the continent, but also to liberate Africa to play its role in the world. And this topic is central to our collective strive to recalibrate Africa's global narrative and to reposition the continent as a major global powerhouse. Reeling from the scarring effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and multiple conflicts that we're experiencing worldwide, geopolitical tensions and uncertainties in the economies and in the climate chaos that we're seeing. We heard the United Nations Secretary General, my boss, Antonio Guterres, during the just concluded 2024 SDG Summit. He indicated that, and I quote, "Now is the time to invest in development at scale like never before." End of quote. You know that the Sustainable Development Goals report of 2024 by the United Nations finds that only 17% of the goals are on track, and nearly half are showing minimal or moderate progress. And progress on over 1/3 has stalled or even regressed. And for Africa, the picture is even worse. UNDP's 2024 South Africa Sustainable Development Report shows that less than 6% of the 32 measurable SDG targets will be achieved by 2030. This trend has to be reversed, and we will have a vital role in the quest for a better world for everyone. You know, the Human Development Report of 2023 of UNDP talked about the global gridlock. And I don't know how many of you have read the Human Development Report. If you haven't, I suggest you make it part of your reading list because it really lays out the state of the world as it is today and how we need to unlock that gridlock, because that has a specific impact on whether we're able to unlock Africa's potential or not. Let me come back to the concept of misperceptions and myths around Africa. I want to underscore that the current narrative must change for us to see change in Africa. And it must change from one that solely focuses on problems and challenges, as the Vice Rector was talking about, to one that illuminates the immense opportunities and potential that the African continent bestows. So in this conversation today, I will not dwell too much on Africa's challenges because guess what? You've all written theses about Africa's challenges. And I'm sure some of you are even right now writing PhD papers on the challenges on the continent. So I'll leave that to you. And I'm going to focus mostly on its potential. But let me come back to these misconceptions. You know, there's a recent book that was just written that I also want to base a lot of my comments on. It's written by a gentleman who was a former colleague at the United Nations, the former executive secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. Carlos Lopez. And the title of that book is called Self-Deception Trap. And here Lopez shows how misconceptions about Africa, from maps, the Africa map, yes, and the world map, to population projections, to economic assessments. Let's welcome the arrivals. I think the bus has come in. For joining us. Just pause as they take their seats. So Mr. Lopez shows how misconceptions yes. Right. Yeah, it's quite a lot of people. Yes, 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 yes. Sure. Yes, because it focuses. Is this kind of let me see if I can put it closer. I can let me see if I can hold it, yeah. Okay. So I was starting to sort of unpack these misperceptions and misconceptions and myths about Africa. And I'm basing this on a recent book, which I want to recommend to all of you, which is written by Carlos Lopez on self-deception trap. And one of the reviewers of the book described it as such. He says, Lopez shows how misconceptions about Africa, from maps to population projections to economic assessments, join with unequal power to shape interactions between the world and Africa to the detriment of both. Neocolonialism remains pervasive in aid as charity, in the false promise of comparative advantage in trade, in the promotion of extractivism, in attitudes to migration, and in international negotiations. Lopez's book is a challenge to established mindsets, a manual for self-respect in Africa, and a wake-up call for everyone else. The book shows that Africa has outgrown a relationship with the rest of the world based on aid and charity. What colonialism did and what aid does is to drill an inferiority complex into the minds of Africans. In this context, a new generation of Africans is really trying to redefine their relationships with the world into one that is based on mutual respect, on cooperation, and on shared progress. And I want to associate myself with that generation because I stand here in front of you as a testament to what Africa is made of and capable of. And some of you in the room who are students from Africa of this university also project the Africa that is real. I went to school in my country, Nigeria. I went to university there. Now I know all the negative perceptions we have about Nigerian or African institutions. But I grew up in this African institution, much of my studies. And when I wanted to do my graduate studies outside Nigeria, I competed like everyone else for scholarship in an Ivy League university in the US. And this young lady from a little known Nigerian university won a place with a Fulbright in an Ivy League taught by Nigerians, exposed to materials from Nigeria. Many of you here today have come out of the same African institutions that get a bad rap, taught by the same lecturers and professors who are least respected in global academics. And you are competing shoulder to shoulder with your peers in the international community and here in Japan. So that is the first misconception that we must overcome. I was intrigued to hear from my colleague here, who is Japanese, when we arrived, that this period that we're in, indeed last week, was a period described as Obon, which is a time when most Japanese go home to reconnect with their ancestors. And I was quite surprised by that because I didn't know that a country like Japan, so advanced in its technology and one of the wealthiest economies in the world, and therefore fully evolved, had these beliefs and still was connecting to its heritage. Now, most of you who are from Africa would know that ancestral worship was one of the reasons the Europeans, particularly Britain, used to justify their colonization of the continent. Africans were told by missionaries that ancestral worship was evil. The colonial project pushed ideologies that framed Africa as a backward continent for these practices. This drove Africans to become ashamed of their history and their culture. Africans were told that the colonizers had come to save them. That savior mentality remains today a yardstick with which Africa's relationship with the world is measured. That savior mentality. I want to say that Africans were caused by this to really feel a sense of being diminished and minimized. Let me give an example of this minimization of Africa, demonstrated by Lopez and Karakhach in 2020, showing that historically Africa has been portrayed through an accepted view that minimizes the continent's proper size and developmental achievements, quite literally. So some of you may know the Mercator cartography of 1569, which depicted the world on a map. And it became one of the most influential and widely circulated world maps in the 19th and 20th century. This map shrinks Africa, projecting its over 30 million square kilometer landmass into the equivalent size of Greenland, a distortion that is roughly 14 times. That means Africa is actually 14 times bigger than it is reflected on the map. Africa, these authors argue, is as big, easily as big as India, China, the US, and most of Europe combined. If this fact was fully embraced and depicted by the world, perhaps many of us from the continent will not today be hearing statements like, in Africa, do you guys have this culture, this behavior? Concepts about Africa as a homogeneous little country somewhere, not a continent of diverse people and cultures made up of 54 countries. Africa, in many people's minds, is one small place with lots of animals running around and huts. This is a consequence of this colonial heritage of minimization, which has crept into the mindset, not only of Africans, but those who relate with the continent. This argument goes on to say that Africa has a blue economy that is even bigger than its land mass, that the maritime zones under Africa's jurisdiction alone total about 13 million square kilometers. For the mathematicians in the room, you can try and figure that out, including territorial seas and approximately 6.5 million square kilometers of the continental shelf. With these distortions intact, we see today even Google and the Google map uses this kind of construction as a basis for web projections, and it unwittingly reinforces these attitudes towards Africa. The misconceptions of Africa continues today, and these narratives can be summed up into three elements. One is geography, which does not reflect the actual spatial coverage of human activity on the African continent. Two is the economy, which needs to capture Africa's vast resources, and I'll come back to this, and its endowments and layers of complexity that GDP does not capture. And Lopez argues that if the real GDP of Africa is calculated, Africa would represent a bigger economy than, say, India. And its consumer market would be resized considerably. Africa could qualify, besides G20, for a seat at the G7. It took Africa a while to even become a member of the G20 through the African Union. The third is demographics, which underestimate the current population boom that positions the African continent as the reservoir of youth globally, while the rest of the world is aging fast. So these negative perceptions affect Africa's mindset, and it partly explains why the continent imports more than 70% of what it needs to sustain life. While countries like Japan, which invested in believing in itself, this was a country that basically closed the doors at one point and decided on a national self-reflection to connect itself to its DNA. And that particular exercise of connecting to your essence, to your values, without pollution, without adulteration, led to some of the things that have laid the foundation for this country's economic advancement. It is critically important. In most of Africa today, we import even something like toothpick. You know, on the way here, we had the privilege of going to the chopstick factory, and we made some chopsticks for ourselves. You see industry that's linked to the lifestyle of the people. Japan doesn't have to depend on anybody for the implements that it uses on a daily basis. It creates a local industry to produce it. This is a big lesson for Africa, but it's a mindset situation. And I want to argue today that part of the reason why Africa is so dependent on external values and goods, it's because it never really took the time that a country like Japan took to make that connection to its strength, its inner strength, and to have that resolve that it would unleash its own internal capabilities and values to change the course of its history. Hence, African countries today also are exposed by this misconception to a higher risk rating. As again, the Vice Rector mentioned, you think of Africa, you think of risk. This has huge implications for investment opportunities. UNDP did a recent study. It's the cost of borrowing study, we call it, which showed that African countries are borrowing at 10 times more interest rates than many others because of a subjective credit rating based mostly on misconceptions of the continent. This has a debilitating effect on African countries in the sense that many countries are having to spend the vast majority of their resources servicing debt than actually taking care of their population because they're so afraid of being downgraded. We showed in that report that in 16 countries that were rated, they could have saved $75 billion if they had been fairly rated based on a fair appreciation of risk rather than one colored by misperceptions. So what we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, it's a serious business of why Africa's potential has taken much longer to unlock. It is really linked to the issue of narrative. The development imperative today should be driven by a mission to restore Africa's agency. This is what we believe in UNDP and what we're driving today. This is what I personally have given my life to. This is why I urge every African who has an opportunity to be in a world-class institution just such as this, to begin to re-educate the world about Africa's place in the world, to begin to reclaim that agency. Because without that agency and the self-confidence that it brings, Africa has no future to speak of. This is why we believe in TICAD, and why I'm here every year for TICAD. Because I have this hope that TICAD can make a big contribution to this mission by first recognizing that this has to be an equal partnership based on mutual respect. That Africa's history and heritage has contributed to global growth. That young African innovators harbor the solutions to Africa's problems and challenges and beyond and need to be invested in. That the approach has to be about co-creation, not an imposition. That Africa needs to be better understood as a destination, not just for the extraction of raw materials, which has dominated its relationship with the world today, but as a place for value addition to raw materials, as a place to create conditions for value chains that help to expand job opportunities at home for Africa's youth. That Africa deserves a seat at the various global platforms, from the Security Council to the various Gs, not just as a subject, but as an agent of change and as an equal partner. That African countries are serious about the net carbon future and that their critical minerals can play a crucial role. But these must also contribute to Africa's energy independence. That Africa must fight against historical erosion. TICAD can help end Africa's marginalization in the international discourse and in global politics. And here I want to pause and commend JICA and the Japanese government for creating opportunities to introduce some of Africa's best to the world and to this country. I think this is healthy. It's a move in the right direction to show that Africa in Africans has the intellectual power, capacity to be an equal partner and to make a contribution to the world. For the younger generation of Africans, listen to what Frantz Fanon once said. He declared that each generation must, out of relative obscurantism, discover its mission and fulfill it. This resonates with some of what we're seeing emerging in Africa today with the Gen Z, who are grappling with forging progressive pathways that impact their lives positively. But I pause to say to the Gen Z, part of that agitation must be about preserving your heritage, embracing your culture, and understanding the African DNA and what it has to do with shaping the future. You know, last week, UNDP launched, and I was very proud of this as the head of Africa and UNDP, we launched a campaign which we call I Am Sahel. Anybody here from the Sahel? Oh, we have, what country are you from? Senegal. Anyone else? Yeah? Same country. And then the back? Senegal is reigning in Japan. But you know, the Sahel has had such a bad rap. You think the Sahel, you think a piece of wasteland. But this is a region that is not just pregnant with potential, but actually is the birthplace of civilization, the birthplace of commerce, of knowledge, of science, the place that gave birth to the richest man in history, Mansa Musa. If you don't know your African history, please look into it. Mansa Musa comes from Timbuktu, which is the reason UNDP adopted the name Timbuktu for our foremost, largest initiative to support Africa's innovation ecosystem. I Am Sahel portends to tell a different story of the region by bringing to the fore the strength, the resilience, the culture, the beauty, the color of a people called the Sahelians, with their stories told not by external actors, but by themselves, their music, their creativity, their culture. And we believe in the UNDP that it is this rich cultural and historic heritage that is going to help liberate this region and help it overcome its current woes. Let me turn to a few myths that you hear about Africa. And I want to talk about the misconception that Africa is poor, right? There is poverty on the continent, don't get me wrong. And as I said, all of you have studied it. But Africa is immensely resource rich, boasting some of the world's significant reserves of renewable and non-renewable resources. It holds 40% of the globe's gold, up to 90% of its chromium and platinum, and the largest cobalt, diamonds, platinum, and uranium reserves. Additionally, Africa possesses 60% of the world's best solar resources, 65% of its arable land, cultivable arable land, and 10% of its internal renewable freshwater resources. If we harness these resources sustainably, we can drive substantial economic growth, alleviate poverty, and address glaring income and wealth inequalities that are especially found in the rural communities of the continent. What do we need to do this? We believe in UNDP that an agricultural revolution is called for. And it could push about 110 million people out of extreme poverty by 2043, if we take that seriously. We believe that it's important to implement the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. And if we did that with some seriousness, this could account for 80 million more Africans moving out of extreme poverty. African governments should adopt targeted social protection and provide short-term social assistance to most vulnerable of the populations. And there's a need also for gender-sensitive policies and investments that could accelerate poverty eradication, not just its reduction. Over the longer term, at UNDP, we believe that African countries must build resilience by investing in health protection for all, which also offers high potential for employment creation. And I salute Japan as a country for its leadership role in pushing for universal health and global health transformation. Myth number 2 is about governance challenges. In 2024, we saw kind of a characterization of super election year to this year, with an estimated 2.5 billion people across 50 countries expected to go to the polls. About 19 African countries will hold presidential or general elections in 2024. And 2/3 of these elections may be considered not so great. Today, we see the growth of unconstitutional governments, particularly in the Sahel region, a pushback on democracy, but something that UNDP has characterized as a pushback on bad governance. We feel that in these countries, it isn't a push against democracy, but an outcry for renewed democracy, for a renewal of democracy, democracy that delivers dividends to the population. And in a world where democracy faces unprecedented challenges to deliver prosperity fairly, we need to figure out how to navigate the complexities that require bold initiatives and approaches. And we think that Africa too can lead on good governance. Since there are many Senegalese in the room, I want to single out Senegal as a country in that same Sahel that only a few months ago demonstrated the strength of democracy by actually enacting what democracy stands for: a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We saw the power of people democracy unleashed in that country. This could become also a contagion effect. What is needed? Most African countries endorse norms, institutions, and practices associated with democratic governance. But this now has to go right to the heart of the people and what they believe is the country they want to live in. It shouldn't just sit with a state construction, only manipulated by elites. Let me make reference to a last myth, and that is on Africa and immigration. Most African migrants are young, and they migrate within the continent of Africa, seeking employment opportunities in urban areas. Others seek jobs outside the continent, primarily in the Middle East and Europe. But this myth that Africans are leaving their continent in droves, it's a myth, because Africans comprise just 6.6% of all migrations in these regions that we talk of. Limited economic opportunities, and of course, in some cases, conflict are drivers, but Africans are mostly migrating within Africa. And the reality here is African migrants often, even when they leave the continent, they fill critical gaps in these destination countries. They don't create a crisis. That is a misperception. They contribute positively to local economies. When COVID hit, some of you might be surprised to know that the vaccines that were developed, there were Africans among the scientists and the technology experts who developed these vaccines. They were Africans in the diaspora. Another element is international remittances, which remain a significant source of foreign exchange for several countries and income for migrant households. In 2022, nearly $100 billion flowed into Africa in remittances, which is approximately twice the level of overseas development assistance. In 2022, the same year, Africa received $53 billion of ODA, but Africans returned 100 billion to the continent. These are Africans who are considered migrants. Their contributing to education, to reducing poverty in their countries. What is needed is to protect migrants. What is needed is effective integration and social inclusion policies. What is needed is voluntary assisted return and reintegration program. What is needed is emergency and humanitarian assistance to migrants and displaced people. What is needed is to invest on development in Africa. I want to start concluding here by saying a few words about what Japan and Africa and UNDP are involved in. And what is the promise that we are projecting today through this partnership? The first is to say that UNDP Africa recognizes the unique role Japan-Africa relations can play in contributing to the SDGs and accelerating Agenda 2063. We want to express our highest appreciation to the government of Japan for the partnership in promoting economic and human development in Africa. We will continue to collaborate under TICAD, which reflects UNDP's foundational belief that sustainable development can only happen with the full participation of a range of partners who believe in our collective humanity and are committed to multilateralism. I believe that this country is one of the champions of multilateralism, and this is important for development in the future. Japan's ODA has risen steadily. While aid has distorted relationships with Africa, I believe that aid still has a role to play in catalyzing growth, investment, and trade, but it should not be an end in itself. And countries like Japan, who continue to provide important aid to Africa, are indeed making a contribution that's important, as long as that aid is seen as a means to an end. UNDP and TICAD are working to nurture tangible thought leadership on the continent, actively engaging and involving Africa's younger generation, particularly those in the private sector, to harness their innovative ideas and drive transformative change. This is the new partnership of purpose that we're promoting from UNDP. The TICAD annual conferences constitute a major instrument of dialogue on Africa's development. And the government of Japan's commitment to Africa's development is evidenced by the richness of the partnership forged with UNDP around TICAD in various fields, including peace building, resilience, and capacity building. These partnerships have recently made much progress, including supporting an inclusive and multi-sectoral response to COVID-19 by addressing its socioeconomic impact, building a resilient and inclusive society, peace and stability, and peacekeeping operations, and also elections assistance. Let me sort of end here with, I would say, an exciting and positive approach to development, which we are nurturing in UNDP. And this is the investment in young people and in women through various initiatives. One of them, I mentioned earlier, Timbuktu. We believe that there is talent everywhere on the continent, and it's incredible, overwhelming talent. But investment is not flowing into this talent. And UNDP wants to champion with partners like Japan a move, a campaign for capital to flow where the talent sits on the continent, with young entrepreneurs, young innovators who are innovating for change. They're not just innovating to buy private jets for themselves. They're actually innovating for the poor. They're innovating to transform the situations that hold people back. And we think they deserve greater attention of international assistance. I also want to say here that UNDP as an organization, working with partners like Japan, turned around this concept or misconception of development assistance through the publication of the Human Development Reports, recalibrating the economic equation back from merely statistics and technical numbers to human development, where we're nurturing the idea that it's all about sustainability and it's about inclusion. We should never entertain anymore in international relations ideas of development that excludes many. At the heart of the development quest today has to be inclusion and sustainability. And this is what human development as a thought leadership proposes. I end with a quote that I heard from a colleague a few months ago. And he said, as we were talking about the issues and challenges in the continent, what is poverty but a failure to love? What is poverty but a failure to love? The mission that we must all undertake, all of you here, working in Africa, for Africa, with Africa, must embrace this idea that we need to foster international cooperation because the world has become so interdependent. We need to foster global solidarity that is based on this concept of overcoming poverty with a force of genuine love and devotion to our humanity, not an idea of neocolonialism, of being patronizing, of dependency, of disrespect. When we adopt these values, I think we will be right on the path to achieving the kind of development that the entire world needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Director, for the great lecture. So now we are going to arrange for the next session. Please give some minutes. Yes, Madam Director and Nakamura-san, please join us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Director and your son. It's a pleasure for us to welcome you here in IUJ. I think here is the good place to, to take the occasion to talk to young generation, especially young Africans and young Asian generation. So thank you for the great lecture. So I would like, before starting the Q&A session, to call Mr. Nakamura-san, maybe to give some comment or questions about the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Sako-san. And then, first of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to Miss Ahunna Eziakonwa. I'm Professor Eziakonwa today for the special lecture. But in any case, I would say thank you very much for your special lecture today. And also, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the International University of Japan for the rare opportunity to welcome to give a special lecture of the at this university today. I would also like to thank all of you who are here today and those who are participating online, especially the younger generation who will lead the future for your participation. Thank you. First of all, I would like to touch upon the point Professor Eziakonwa mentioned. I believe that she shared with us today was very thought-provoking, I would say. First of all, the importance of breaking down misconceptions. Right? Okay. Misconceptions and prejudices about Africa. We may still have an image of Africa as a poor developing countries, and so somewhere in our mind, even myself, I think. Although Africa is often stereotyped in this way, I think the concept of the lecture reminded us that Africa is in fact a continent with a diverse and a rich culture and history and a great economic potential. She also emphasized that Africa still faces many challenges, but at the same time, there is tremendous room for growth and through partnership with Japan, and both Japan and then Africa can move toward sustainable future. Africa's future holds the power to influence the fate of the entire global society, as it is expected to account for about a quarter of the world population by 2050. As she pointed out, we need to think deeply about how we should face and cooperate with Africa's vast potential and its challenges simultaneously. The young people here today are our hope of the future. I'm serious. University student, technical college student, high school student, and junior high school students. Through today's lecture, I'd like to ask you to envision how your energy and your passion, your creativity can change the future of Africa, future of Japan, and the world as a whole, I would say. She also emphasized that this is a time for youth and women to be agent of change by exercising leadership cooperating with others and creating the future together. I believe that Japan and Africa can learn from each other and become real partners in moving forward together. I think this is one of the very important messages from her. I encourage everyone to ask yourselves how you can develop the relationship between Japan and Africa in the future. There are many things you can do, such as participating in international exchange program, or participating in this kind of lectures, or learning about the current situation in Africa, learning about the history of Africa, like her learning about the Japanese culture overall, like that. You know, such kind of all the opportunities you can learn from each other. Maybe you can talk to African students after the lecture. What's the history of the, Africa? What the history, culture of the, country and so forth. It is also important to communicate directly with young people in Africa to understand the perspectives. By respecting each other's culture and values, new ideas and forms of cooperation will emerge. I think that is one of the very important message she wrote today. I believe that by learning from each other and growing together, Japan and Africa can move forward toward a sustainable future. As Professor Eziakonwa from UNDP mentioned already, JICA also would like to do its utmost to support younger generation in taking their first step. For example, JICA will continue to cooperate with UNDP and support the Model African Union for Japanese university students and the COSEN Open Innovation Challenge for College of Technology students, the Africa-Japan Youth Drive event in which Japanese and African youth make proposal for Decade 9, and the ABE initiative. You know ABE initiative, right? Is there any ABE student here? Great. Thank you. Well, to study in Japan, through such program, we will continue to work to deepen cooperation between the youth of Japan and Africa, and to create an environment in which you can play a central role in this cooperation. I would say co-creation and mutual respect, which is the most important concept toward the new relationship. I would say the real equal partnership for the relation between Japan and Africa countries. Let me stop here, and then thank you very much for the special opportunity for today.
Thank you very much, Nakamura-san. I hope after this lecture, we will go back with full energy, full motivation for the future of our continent, Africa. So thank you very much. Now let's move forward for the Q&A session. But before that, I would like to remind you that we have some people that are following us online, that are joining us online. So thank you guys for joining us. So dear audience, I would like to give you the floor. If you have questions or remarks about this lecture, please, the floor is yours. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ahunna-san and Nakamura-san. My name is Agnes from Nigeria, and my questions, I have like one question, but I'll leave it open. So in the case of Africans, neglecting the facts and figures of who we are and the things we represent. And some of them use some of the things we're trying to debunk to the outer world as a means to get funding or aid. What we say to Africans who are diminishing the value and the integrity of Africa. That's my question. Thank you. The question is, if there is something we can say to them in the aspect of some of these things might not be necessarily true. I'll give an example. Right when we got to Japan, I remember the first Abe conference for the JICA Abe initiative. I met a guy who was a startup and was also trying to build a solution. However, he was talking about the part of Africa who has nothing related to laundry. We can't do our laundry. He's trying to do a laundromat. And the women who were seated in the building were like, no, this is not true. But we can't say it because, I mean, it's this person's idea. And the person is also trying to get funding, and it would look like you're blocking opportunities for them. So what do we say to those misrepresentation and to Africans that are doing that?
You have to challenge it. And challenge it aggressively. I think this is what I would advise every African, especially your generation, who have also been exposed to the international sort of setting. I think it's part of the malaise that I'm talking about in terms of our mindset. The use of negative casting of Africa to raise funds is very pervasive. You find it everywhere, especially also in the humanitarian industry, where the more you can paint Africa black and evil and backward, the more opportunities you have to raise resources. And we have all seen the images on the screen. We have seen names that don't exist. It does not mean that there is no humanitarian crisis on the continent, but we know that this is usually abused, and sometimes by Africans themselves. The example that you just gave. And I think every African should be on a mission to correct those misperceptions. You must be factual in your representations. We're not saying color everything and hide the truth, but we're also not saying don't distort the picture. Recently I just happened to be watching an advertisement, and this was by a Black, not African, but American, who was selling hair products. And she somehow used the African context as an example to demonstrate the message that she was giving, and where she talked about African women not having access. And she used this language: African women do not have access to the hair products that we have access to. Like, they don't have shampoo, they don't have this, and they use only herbs. And then she showed pictures of Chadian women with very long hair and says because they don't have access to those products, and those products are harmful. And what she's selling is natural products. So she could sell her natural products without necessarily using Africa as a place of ignorance where people just don't know anything about the modern developments, right? So that's an example. And I think every African, wherever you are, or non-African, should challenge those things. And what the special advisor said also to Japanese students in the room: educate yourself. Don't just go by what you see on YouTube or social media about Africa. And I'm glad that JICA and the Japan government as a whole is facilitating trips by Japanese young people to Africa, because that's the best education, is for you to go into those countries and actually experience the continent for yourself. But not everybody can go, right? So it's then important that those who know should spread the word.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Director. Thank you very much. And I think this showed all the sense of the slogan, I am Sahel. Because I'm from Senegal, so I am Sahel. So it's the way, you know, to see, to show to the world that Africa is not only the negative part that they are showing us. Africa is also very, very full. The culture is many things else that maybe for those who are not Africans, we encourage you to come and you will see. Thank you very much for this answer. So Nakamura Sensei, if you have something to add on this, please.
Well, thank you very much. I think that, yeah, the important thing is mutual understanding. And then I will try to, I would say that please go and look and talk with the people living in African countries. So that is one of the solutions to mutual, to, accelerate the mutual understanding of each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions? Okay, please. Here.
Thank you very much for your lecture. My name is David from Nigeria, and I was interested in one of your parts, where you talked about co-creation. I mean, it's a concept here in Japan. Even my sensei in school, he always talks about co-creation. Now, I'm looking at co-creation in the context of business, where I believe it's where consumers play a vital role from the beginning to the end of the product, service design. Now, I have two questions. You've seen the UNDP program here. So my question is, how can we ensure meaningful participation of local communities, marginalized groups in Africa? And how can we ensure their meaningful participation in this co-creation process? And then the second question is, how can we assess whether co-creation truly leads to a more contextual, appropriate and effective development solution?
Yes, Madam Director, please.
Meaningful participation, I think it's exactly what's happening in this room today. It's giving opportunity to young Africans and young Japanese to be exposed to a learning environment that is different from what they know, to expand their horizons. Because when you have that access, your participation is going to be much more, And I always say to people, if you're given a platform, use it. Never, ever waste an opportunity to make your voice felt when you are given an opportunity. Every one of you in this room is privileged. You've been given a platform, you've been given a space that many don't have. And you have to wake up every day asking yourself, how am I participating? How am I using that space? I occupy a space at my job, which I feel it's a great privilege as the director of the Africa Bureau in UNDP. It's my preoccupation every day to ask myself as a woman and a woman from the continent, how I am using that position and that space, and who else I am enabling to come into that space. And this is why when I started this job and saw that we have very few women of Africa in influential positions globally, and one of the initiatives that I embarked on was something called the Young Africa Women Fellows Program, which we're doing in conjunction with the African Union Commission. And I believe there's a fellow from that program in the room today who helped to organize this. Where's Arij? Maybe she's, there she is from Tunisia. Arij is one of 38 or so young women from across the continent in the third cohort of the program who have just been picked up from universities with your qualification is that you should not have more than 1 year of experience. Because often young people are told, where is your experience before they're admitted into the hall? And UNDP is saying, no, you have to actually give them the opportunity to get the experience. So these young ladies come into the UNDP, they are deployed in different countries and different entities of the organization for 1 year as fellows. They get a platform and they get to expand their horizon and to begin to cultivate the ingredients that they need to become global leaders. That is participation. Last year at COP28 in Dubai, we decided in UNDP Africa to enable 100 young African climate champions to go to Dubai. You can't take it for granted that even when they're in their countries doing a lot of activities on climate change, that they will ever get an opportunity to be at a global event like that. And I was outstanded when I announced this contribution in a room full of young activists, and they jumped to the roof. Like, this is an opportunity they would never have had. They all went to Dubai, and some of them were from Ghana. And when I was visiting Accra 2 months ago, I was amazed to hear their experiences of what they did after Dubai and how that exposure has really enhanced their ability to play in the space. So participation, meaningful participation, it's a responsibility that you take at a personal level. That when you are given a platform, you use it not only to expand your own participation, but to bring others on board. And your second question on co-creation, I will leave to Nakamura-san to answer.
Well, thank you very much. Well, co-creation is not the concept. Co-creation is just a method to reach the final goal. And I would say there is so many opportunities for co-creation for you around yourself right now. As she mentioned already, we have so many younger generations from African continent and then, Japan. Why don't you, talk to them and then, talking to them and find, another way of thinking. That is the co-creation itself, you see. Whenever you think about by yourself, you have your bias and then prejudice for the solution. But if you talk to the people from other country or other culture or other, system of the country, you can get some hint, another way of the solution. That is the sort of the co-creation. Therefore, the act first and then think later. That is the way of the co-creation, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nakamura-san. Thank you, Madam Director. So keywords, personal responsibility and co-creation is, talking to each other, discussing, making relationship. So it's important. I think after this meeting, we will have time to do that with, all this audience here. So if there is another question, please, someone. Oh, all right. Okay. Liverpool guy. Oh, Manchester guy. Please, you.
Okay, thank you. Duncan from Kenya. I have a question. So we appreciate the UNDP program in Africa and in the continent. But you find these programs, yes, they are incorporated in African countries, but at the end, you find that the great profit or the biggest impact will end up in the countries that has invested in the program, whereas the Africans, yes, we benefit, but it is like a form of exploitation. Speaking this with a background in our country where there was a certain program of using green energy where these Western communities, I don't want to mention the the country, but they were building what can I call them? Those cooking vessels that consume less firewood. They were taking pictures, so that is like a form of exploitation. So how can you help without posing that negative picture of Africans to the outside world, or it becomes a win-win such of interaction, whereas not one side of the coordinating partners will benefit fully. So that's my question. And another one is that after investing in Africa, how can we help the African countries to exploit the resources that you have invested fully without some of the resources being exploited by the leaders or the acting leaders of Africa countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would like to invite you guys to try to be a bit shorter so that she can be able to respond to all the questions. Thank you.
It's a good question. It's a bit related to Agnes's question earlier about the distortions or even the images, right? How you use images, how you use communication, and this can be used exploitatively. We, as a development agency in UNDP, we face the same challenges, right? Because donors, invariably, when they put money in, they want to show impact. They want to show the problem. This is why you're raising money. And you can fall into that trap of always putting the laser on the negative image, because that's what parliamentarians will be swayed by when you go to argue for the budget. And it's a dilemma, because on one hand, you want to bring more resources to bear on the challenges. On the other hand, to do so, you feel you have to show the problem. And I think the way we've tried to handle it in UNDP is actually to use the inspirational message lens. So even if you're in parliament, today, even donors are fatigued by the negative. It is demoralizing. People have a sense that they're putting so much money and the results in that is never there. Like it's a never-ending cycle of poverty and stories of poverty being thrown at them. So we're testing this by switching the lens from problem to opportunity. And that's why today we're featuring young people who are developing homegrown solutions to solve their own problems. in UNDP, we established what we call the African Influencers for Development. And this is our way of featuring captains of business and industry who in their own countries in Africa are actually making a difference. So that you sitting here in Japan or anywhere in Africa, when you look at images of the development trajectory, you see African faces, not just foreign faces. You see people who look like you, who are making a difference, who are changing situations on the ground. This is what builds confidence. This is also what builds agency. What we reject is the notion that Africa's problems have to be solved by outsiders. And when we feature these images and stories, we just show outsiders changing the situation in Africa. In that example you gave in Kenya of the cooking stove, you will be surprised when you dig deeper in the story that there is a Kenyan influencer who came up with ideas there, who actually has done a lot in that field. That's the story that we want to tell. And the outside support comes just as a backup support. That's the way you tell the story. And I think we all need to relearn how we tell the story of development by making sure that we're not diminishing, we're not minimizing the role of the people themselves on the ground, because often they are the forefront of finding solutions for their problems, and we don't feature them, their strength, their resilience. Hence, I Am Sahel, because the story of I Am Sahel is also to feature that resilience of the communities and their own efforts to lift the challenges that they face. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Director. So many questions online and even here, but I think due to the time constraint, we are sorry. Maybe we gotta take one question from one colleague from Japan. If any, yeah, please. And after that, one from the online guys. Yeah, please.
Thank you for amazing lecture today. I'm just a high school student, so actually I can think about problem in the world because I'm really afraid of my future. So through this lecture, my images for Africa has really changed because actually when I learned about Africa in elementary school or middle high school, Africa is a development country, but I felt that many students in Japan should know about Africa because Africa have a hope. I felt because I thought about what the true development is, because now in Japan really concentrate on new technology and development on like intelligence, AI. But I thought through this lecture, new development is really sustainable because if we think about development in Africa, we can make new way to develop the country and world. So we have to learn from Africa because new development is really eco-friendly and easy. Sorry, my English. Easy. Well, yeah. So we have to make new way to develop the country together. That's the co-creation. but now I'm really confusing for entrance exam for university. So I have no time and no much knowledge to think about words problems. So how can we, that student, could think about words problem and how should we act for new co-creation? So I want to ask you some advices for us. You.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your intervention, Madam, please.
Your name? Yuna, very brave, and you give me hope. I think you answered your own question, actually. I think it is here saying to your teachers, give us some time to learn about the world also, and to learn about how we co-create. I think every university, every high school should create space for co-creation. That is part of your exams, part of the requirements. It has to be built into the curriculum to really learn about the world. You said something very fundamental, which is that we have to find a new way of developing, because the old ways have not really completely solved the world's problems. We have destroyed our planet through this development pathways that we have followed in the past. Africa is the place that still offers the world a chance to find alternatives on how to have sustainable futures. And, bring in the advanced economies and countries to work in this co-creation space with the innovators in Africa is going to give us what we need for the future, what the world needs. The Africa we want, I always say, is the Africa the world needs, right? And I think it's going to be important to create those spaces in the high schools, and starting at your level is really very important. We don't have to wait until you have graduated, you have learned all the wrong ways, and then they tell you you need to adjust. You can start now really to make those adjustments by having this interaction with other parts of the world. I have to say that because of the challenges that African youth face, they're really innovative. They're coming out with creative ideas on how to develop differently. And this can be shared and also can be built on from what you have learned in your own development trajectory.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We are so sorry. We are so sorry because due to time constraints, so now we are going to move to the other session, the networking session. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ijaro for the closing remarks. So Mr. Ijaro, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone, the special guests, the distinguished Miss Ahunna, the essay to the president of JICA, and all other distinguished guests present. We thank you so much for today. I would like to thank the organizers of the events. We worked day and night to make this a reality. It's been a long journey, planning and replanning, and eventually we have the day here. We thank you all for coming around and for making this day a reality. Also, I want to take a moment to sincerely appreciate the entire IUJ management, also for their tireless efforts and the inputs they put in to make this a reality. The African community in IUJ is a model that most other universities can pick some ideas for about co-creation. So I think it's a good idea for you to interact with some African community member and leadership we have here. Also, Madam, UNDP can do much more with African students using IUJ as a model.
because IUJ has one of the highest number of African students in Japan, and many innovations you want to thrive within, projects you want to, they have a community united and powerful that you can work with here. And I think they'll be reaching out to you at a later date to see how this can actually be improved on. Thank you all for coming around. On behalf of Mr. Trimo Busariri, the President of African Community, and the entire management of African Community, say thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, President Ijaro. So now, please, I would like to call you guys to join us here for group pictures. And after that, we will move for the networking session. Thank you very much. Please join us here. We will have a picture.
Yeah, everybody move to the front, and thank you so much for taking photo.